Okay, so the course structure today, and I'm going to keep things really simple today. It's one of those topics that can get very complicated. There are tools and techniques under absolutely every aspect of problem solving, but I really just want to give you one sort of streamlined process so that you can pick up the process, learn some of the jargon, but more importantly, see how you can evidence your own problem solving skills and maybe be able to describe how you use this, problem solving process in your own life, basically. So there's no point in just having this jargon unless you can apply it to how you actually do use it. So as I say, I'm keeping it simple. I'm not getting into wicked problems. I'm not giving you a lot of techniques. I'm taking you through one simple step-by-step process. So we start by looking at what we mean by problems, because remember, we're talking about business here. We're not talking about our own personal problems or anything. I'll give you an idea of some thinking processes used in problem solving, and then I'll outline a 6-step process which takes you through identifying a problem to making a decision and implementing it. And of course, we'll finish with some sample interview questions on the topic. So our definition that I will use today is a problem is an unexpected deviation from the normal. And the important thing here is that we need to know what the norm is. And we'll look at some examples of that later. And then we need to decide if indeed that deviation is a problem. It could be a great thing and not a problem, okay? But you obviously have to start from somewhere. And when we think about a problem, we use different processes. And I should say, this is not about design thinking, which is a very specific sort of process. It's just, I'm just sort of giving you a simple problem solving process here. So we analyze things, we separate something into its constituent parts. We often use this when we're faced with a lot of facts and we want to simplify them. Many of you in, whatever sort of courses that you're doing will be taught to do this as part of your curriculum. And we synthesize. This is basically the opposite of analysing. So we take a series of elements and we put them together. And synthesizing, often a bit more difficult than analysing. It's the sort of thing that good detectives are good at. So piecing together the strands of evidence to arrive at a whole solution. So as I said, it tends to be more difficult than analysis, but it's often very rewarding and very successful because the whole can be much more than the sum of its parts. Another thinking process is that imagining. And this is where you're likely to hear people saying things like, let's assume that, or supposing we try it like this. Okay, so whenever you get people starting to sort of expand their thinking and begin to imagine doing things in a different way. And then the last one is applying values. So we all have a set of values and standards, which include, among other things, maybe, moral, social, financial values or standards. And when we're presented with a problem, we apply these values to the problem. And mostly we're not, even aware that we do this. So that could mean that some problems can be very important to one group of people and, almost meaningless to another group of people because they're applying different sets of values. So for example, someone with strong moral or religious views about a particular type of food will approach the problem of, for example, planning a camping trip in a totally different way from someone who's indifferent to the issue. So a vegan is, not likely to be packing the sausages, unless they're vegan sausages, of course. Now, I'm not saying that they wouldn't, because they may also go, well, there's lots of people that aren't vegan here, so I also need to supply food for them. But you apply your own set of morals, your own set of standards to the issue. And, it's useful for you to be aware of that. So we often automatically apply our own sets of values, which is not always in line with other people's. And part of the reason that it's good to get other people's view is so that you get a mix of that as well. The significance of problems can also change over a period of time. As I was writing this session, COP26 was on, and everything was about the environment and about climate change. But it's really not that long ago. And, I'm saying that perhaps not in your lifetime, but certainly in my lifetime, that things like environmental damage and waste disposal were just not really on the agenda for companies. Now companies are very aware that their approach to the design of products and the processes that they use has to be at the forefront of their agenda. And not just because of any government proposals, but also because of the values that the people who work for them hold. Graduates who want to work for sustainable companies have driven companies to be more sustainable. Consumers are driving companies to provide more sustainable products. So this process of applying values to problem solving isn't just some sort of vague theoretical concept. It has very practical implications. So that's just one example of that. And it's worth noting that one significant finding to come from research on excellent organizations and how they work is that they have a clear, well-defined set of values, which are known and understood by all who work for the organization. And they use those values to guide what they do, how they solve problems, and how they make choices. So you'll certainly want to look whenever you're, looking at where you're going to be working, you'll certainly want to look at company values as well as looking at your own set of values as well. And I have to say that whenever I was, doing a bit of research for this topic, I hadn't really connected the values and problem solving before. But whenever I think about it, I can certainly think maybe more examples of how companies didn't live up to their own values when they were solving problems. Because, you hear about that sort of thing in the news, but it's certainly something that has to be considered whenever you are in a company trying to solve a problem that has arisen. Does it align with the company values as well? And indeed with your own values too. Okay, so I'm going to look at this 6-step approach to problem solving. And as you can see, it's divided into 2 very different processes. So analysing the problem and deciding on a solution, essentially problem solving and decision making. So step 1 is deciding whether a problem exists. Now have a look at these problems. They're just sort of, wee phrases here. It's too hot in here. The colour seems a bit off. There's not enough work being done in your section. Now, each of the statements are fairly vague. If you remember our definition earlier of a problem is an unexpected deviation from the normal. So you can't really judge if there is a problem unless there's a comparison to what is normal or what is the standard. So how hot is it in terms of what are the normal working conditions? Do I have a standard colour to compare it to in order to find out if indeed the colour is a bit off? And in terms of the work being done in the section, the manager would need to be able to compare work output in the work schedule. Is this below what is the norm here? Now, of course, there will be issues that are not so cut and dried. And some things might just be that, you have a vague feeling of unease that things are not quite right. But you should be able to look at what should be happening and what is happening that is different from that. Okay, so, what is the normal? What should be happening? How are things different to that? So moving to step 2, then define the problem. It's important to select and tackle only the problems that matter. Is there an impact on profits, on staff, on the environment, the company reputation, etc.? Gather the information and rank them so that you can make a decision on what actually is a priority. And then you must be specific about what the problem actually is. And I'm just going to put in what is known as the Kepner and Trego approach to problem analysis. It's a very sort of specific approach to defining the problems. I suppose as it's written there, it's, it can be, I suppose, quite complicated. I have a wee matrix in the next one, which will help you to look at it as well. So what they say is you must specify is what the problem is, what the problem is not, any distinctive features of the problem, any changes that have occurred, and you must specify each of these aspects of the problem for what is happening, when it is happening, where it is happening, and who is it happening to. And as I said, I think this little matrix is a really useful little tool for investigating and managing that information, and certainly a useful one that you could incorporate into an interview. Not suggesting that you bring up on your phone this matrix that you've used or anything, but if you've had a chance to use it in your problem solving, it certainly would be a good one to be able to say, oh yes, I've used this, where I've looked at the what, where, when, and who to, and what the problem is, what the problem isn't, what distinctive features there are, etc. So maybe look for opportunities to test that one out. I would never be saying to you, go to an interview and use this if you haven't actually done it. Okay, so look for opportunities maybe to test these things out. The easiest method of problem solving might simply be to look at, a list of, the do's and the don'ts, basically. That might be the simplest sort of way. You don't have to go down this route, but it's one of those sort of standard procedures that you might want to be aware of. Step 3 in problem solving is to diagnose the cause. Now, the Kepner-Trego method for systemically defining the problem also often indicates the cause, or at least narrows it down to a few likely possibilities. But an alternative approach is to use a cause and effect diagram, which is also called a fishbone diagram. I'm sure many of you have seen these before. When you're drawing a fishbone diagram, you draw a horizontal line and write the effect that you're interested in explaining at one end. So in this example, as you can see, I've used that first statement, it's too hot in here. And the main ribs then of the fish represent the major categories of possible causes. Often these will be things like people, materials, equipment, and methods. In this case, I've used people, equipment, and ventilation. Then you take each rib in turn and you add the possible subsidiary causes. And these form the bones, okay? And in this case, I have put someone keeps turning the heat up. It's often useful to brainstorm this part of the process. So, you might get other people involved in that. And especially, if you're having to come up with a solution to something, obviously being able to take on board other people's ideas and knowledge is really useful as well. Try to find natural groupings, because that might help you to see how things fit together and maybe see a pattern. And once the diagram is complete, the list of possible causes can be tested against the actual reality. Okay, so that's just one sort of thing that you can use. So having completed the 3 steps in analyze the problem, we then move on to the decide on a solution, essentially the decision-making part of the process. So step 4 then is generate alternatives. And at this stage in the problem-solving process, the essential task is to identify as many solutions as possible. So a group of people brainstorming might be a good way of doing this. And remember, with brainstorming, every idea is valuable. No idea should be dismissed early on, okay, because that might be exactly the correct thing to be looking at. The group should strive for quantity and generate as many ideas as possible, and then start to combine and link the ideas together and start to develop some of those ideas. Okay, so that's brainstorming and linking and developing those ideas. When we get to step 5, then the evaluate and select stage, we move from the sort of, I suppose, freewheeling, generating solution stage, and now we're starting to narrow things down. So evaluating and selecting means that we need to be much more systematic. So we would start by setting our criteria. And this takes us right back to step 1, decide whether a problem actually exists. So just as we needed standards to decide whether there is a problem, now we need to have criteria so that we have something to judge any possible solutions against. And we then need to anticipate problems. Look ahead and try to see what problems might come up. And indeed, if there are, likely to create more problems than we can solve, because that's obviously, one thing to decide in whether we go ahead with the solution or not. Are we going to create problems for ourselves? You can use your intuition and experimentation. Sometimes even rigorous analysis will not produce solutions. Sometimes the only way to know if something will work is to experiment. And I think that, sometimes people can be pretty worried about doing that, depending on the company that you work in, depending on the sort of solutions that you're trying to come up with. But sometimes experimenting can be the only way to do it, to try it out. What looks most promising? And then learn from what happens and use that information to reformulate. Sometimes you have to just go with your intuition. And as I said, I'm well aware that that can be a bit scary, but I'm told that intuition is a valuable tool provided by nature and sharpened by experience. But you do have to be rigorous about what you learn from experimentation, and your final decision should be based on all of the information available to you. Okay, so you're not blindly making decisions. So the final very important step then is implement and follow up. If you're very lucky, the solution you come up with will sort the problem and everyone will be happy. But chances are the solutions might have implications for those that have to put it into effect and that may not be entirely happy with it. So it's important that people are given enough information about it. Tell people what is happening and why, and sell the benefits of it. Be open and honest about any issues and look at issues from the points of view of the individuals that are going to be affected by it. Start your communication as early as possible and give progress reports if you can. Keep people up to date. So part of this information process will be consultation. And to do this, you must be honest. You must encourage open expression of views. You must be seen to make use of what is said, but be clear about what your authority is. So, you can't, just because people complain about something, you might not be able to do anything about that. So if you can't do something, say so. And the final part of implementation and follow-up is organisation. So give plenty of warning of any changes and introduce them gradually where you can. If it's possible, try out new ideas before making a firm commitment to them. Enlist any enthusiastic people to help implement the solution and also to help you to encourage other people. Okay, so that's your 6-step process. That's essentially the topic of problem solving finished. I hope you've at least got, a simple process to follow there. Some useful jargon for you. But as I said, the really key thing is to look at the problem solving that you do, perhaps within your own sessions. I know that within courses, a lot of you will be given projects to work on and things like that. You can certainly look at those as problems. You can also be looking wider at things, maybe things that you do in part of, part-time jobs, anything to do with customer care. All of that kind of thing can be around problem solving. Sometimes I think that whenever we talk about problem solving, we don't link it back enough to the problems that we have ourselves, because we don't necessarily call them problems. They're issues at work, they're things that have happened, okay? So start to think about things that you can consider and put some sort of framework around it. You don't have to use all of what I've just talked about there, but think about how you would talk about your own, the way that you problem solve. So if you have any questions, folks, just put them into the chat. I'm going to move on to the interview questions and things. And always before I start an interview questions, I just go over this STAR framework. So the STAR technique then for effectively answering interview questions. Basically, you want to be able to tell the interviewer your story by putting your answer into context for them, trying to make it as easy for the interviewer as you can do, basically. So when you're formulating an answer for your interview, try and follow the STAR technique. It makes your answers clear, it makes them logical, and it means that you're getting across the main points that you need to get across. So start by listening to the question. Listen carefully to the question that you're being asked, and think of the example that you're going to use. Hopefully you'll have already prepared these answers or similar ones ahead of time, but even if you're having to think on your feet in the interview, frame your answer into situation, task, action, and results. So describe the event or the situation that you were in. Explain the task that you had to complete. What were the challenges? Describe the specific actions that you personally took to complete the task. And I say you personally took because, you can say what you did as a team, but you should also say what you did as an individual. Finish with the results. What was the results of your actions? Were there benefits? Were there savings, cost cuttings, time savings? What was the impact of it? Okay, and then I also want to just remind you too, or let some of you know about Shortlister. So it's a software package that is available to you to practice interviews. It's called Shortlist Me. Patricia will put the link into the chat for me, but you can also find it on the careers website. And the package provides interviews for specific companies, for example, Virgin Media, AstraZeneca, the NHS, but it also provides a chance to interview for roles, for example, in banking or in law, that kind of thing. So there's a broad range of opportunities for you to practice your interviews. I will say to you, please, folks, once you register, you are in control of when you interview, when the interview practice takes place. But you only have 3 days from you register to complete the interview. So, register when you know that you're going to have some time to complete the interview. You're not interacting with real life people, so there's really nothing to be wary of. You'll be responding to pre-recorded questions as if it was an online interview. You get a short time to prepare your answer. You give your answer. It's usually 5 or 6 questions each interview. And the important thing is that you then get some feedback on how you did. Now, again, this is automated feedback, so you're not interacting with anyone, but it is a good interactive quality experience. So I think Patricia's just put that link into the chat there. And I would say to you, do make the most of it, because it is really good, not just to be able to experience what an interview online might be like, but it's really like doing it in real life as well, but without the, I suppose, embarrassment of having to interact with a real life person as well. You can get it completely wrong. Nobody else is going to see those interviews, only yourself. Okay, so some interview questions then. The sort of things that you want to be able to demonstrate in your problem solving and decision making answers is that you can keep a clear head, use sound judgment. And, so I'll look at some of these questions first of all. Why do people make bad decisions? Now, obviously, you could answer that in so many ways, but I think I would probably start with being prepared, okay? Taking time to consider a decision, not jumping to conclusions, that sort of thing. But again, you have to be able to put your own experience and your own knowledge into these answers. What steps do you take when you have an important decision to make? Describe how you needed to research a problem and came up with different alternatives to resolve it. How did you determine the most appropriate solution? So that might be something like you could do as part of coursework there. It might be something that you already have to do. But again, look for things that you've done in your own life as well, your own personal life, or other working examples as well. How do you assess the quality of decisions or recommendations that other people might present to you? Provide an example. Tell us about a decision you made too quickly and got wrong. What made you take that decision? Now, for things like this, by the way, folks, you're not trying to come up with the biggest problem and the biggest solution or, big decisions. It can be quite small things too, but if they're important to you and you've had to go through a process of deciding on something, then that's what you talk about, okay? It's not what's the biggest problem that I can come up with here. It's all about that process. Is it a bad idea to make quick decisions? Why or why not? What advice would you give to someone to help them make better decisions? What percentage of your decisions turn out to be wrong? Maybe lean towards not too many there. What big decision did you make recently? How did you go about it? Have you ever had to make an unpopular decision? And that might be a good one to think about, folks, because often decisions involve other people, other team members, maybe flatmates, that kind of thing. So think about that and how you dealt with it, basically, and maybe how it affected you as well. Talk about a project that didn't go to plan. What did you do to rectify it? Okay, so that's about identifying that there is a problem and then coming up with the solution. Okay, so as I was saying then, you want to be able to show whenever you're answering questions about problem solving and decision making, that you can keep a clear head, that you can use sound judgment based on a good knowledge of the situation. So you want to be able to describe that situation. Just as I said to you, whenever you talk about that STAR technique, it's about describing that situation and how you handled it. Employers will want someone who is willing to take ownership of problems and look for solutions. You might have heard, a manager saying, don't come to me with problems, come to me with the solution. And that's quite a good way of looking at it in terms of this, because you want to not just be looking at what problems there are, but how you might come up with a solution. It might not even be the right one. It might not be the one that the person that you're talking to would have come up with. They'll have different experience than you do, but it's how you come up with a solution. They'll also want someone who is willing to take the tough decisions that can be difficult, maybe involving other people, like job reductions. If you're having to make people redundant or something, that's a difficult one to do. So you want to show that you can make well-informed, effective, and timely decisions, even when data that you have is limited. One of the questions there is about, making quick decisions. And, you need to be aware that sometimes that sort of thing does happen, has to happen. One of the example questions was about, doing that quick decision. And sometimes time is critical and decisions have to be made quickly. Now, obviously, if you have time, you don't make decisions quickly, but sometimes it just has to work that way. You don't necessarily have the luxury of taking your time over it. An employer will want to know that you act in these more, I suppose, pressured situations and how you cope with the tougher aspects of the decision-making process. But generally, you will want to show that you have analysed the evidence and evaluated all the options before making a well-reasoned decision that you can justify. So try to come up with examples that show your reasoning and how you made the decision. And if you can show benefits or positive results of your decision, then all the better. And I suppose it's important to say we don't always call things problems, because they're just, we're just working through situations. So you might want to think about team projects that you've worked on. How did you make decisions in the team? What happened if there was conflict between team members? What happens if not everyone is working to standard? Or a team member gets sick and doesn't fulfill their part of the project, for example? How can you show that you were sensitive to the needs of others while making the tough decisions? And in terms of decisions that maybe went wrong, you'll want to demonstrate your coping mechanisms and how resilient you are. And, obviously, not all decisions that you make will be the correct decision. And that's always going to be the case in business as well. We all make mistakes. So how did you cope? How resilient were you? This is the sort of thing that employers will want to see as well. So talk about what you learned from the situation, maybe what you would do differently, and how you built on that experience. So you want to demonstrate that you have a positive approach to the problems, that you can identify the right solution, and then take action on it by implementing your decision. So if you have any part-time jobs where you've worked with customers, then, maybe being able to sort out a problem for a customer and having a satisfied customer might be a good example of quick problem solving. So, having to make decisions quickly, you might get a good example there. Okay, so that's pretty much me finished there, folks. So if you have questions, please do pop them into the chat there. Meanwhile, just to remind you that I will put the slides, or Patricia will kindly put the slides into the chat for me. Do please also fill in your feedback form. And I also just want to put up the remaining sessions of the employability skills, folks. That's also in the PDF that, I'll put out of the slides. So you don't need to take a note of those sessions. They're all up in the careers events, but I would be very happy to see you at any of them. So once again, folks, if you have any questions, and I shall stop recording so that you can ask any questions that you might like without being recorded.